Dan, hi. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Really good to have you. You're a big interactor with us on the PodBoard. And
that's because you send me flattering tweets, so I retweet them. Obviously, come on, guys, you know what you're doing here. This is not your first rodeo.
Well, look, I'm just a happy face end. Stephen is the real romancer of things. He's the one who chats you up online and sends you the digital chocolates and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, that's right.
So we're primarily here today to talk about History Hit. When I obviously do these shows, I do a bit of a sort of intense course of listening before I speak to you, so that I know what I'm talking about. I love history. I love it. It's a really important, especially now I've got kids, something that I talk to them about frequently. So I was ready for the Vikings and the Romans and all the things I learnt about in history at school, and was confronted by Ian Fleming's James Bond and other such stories. And I thought it was really interesting that history, by its broadest definition, is almost anything that's happened, right? In fact, everything.
That's my little hack. Well, not my hack. I mean, that's why from the beginning of this podcast, I was determined to make it as broad as possible. That does reflect me a bit, because I'm like a jack of all trades, master of none. So I just love general history. Like, I love the whole thing. It makes me a bit unfashionable in terms of modern, if I would want to be a scholar or anything, because obviously, the idea is you go as deep as possible into a particular subject, you become an expert in it, world authority on Methodism or something like that. But for me, I can't help it. I've always been a bit promiscuous and just, I love Chinese history, Roman, Greek, everything. And I figure you define it as broadly as possible, it makes it more interesting. So history is everything that's ever happened to anyone on the planet, and we've come right up to present day, and we've gone right back to the Stone Age, and it's just, I don't know, it just reflects my interest. But I do think probably it helps, because you probably reach a slightly wider audience. So although I think you sacrifice perhaps a bit of loyalty, a bit of like unbelievable fandom, because it's some people go, well, I don't have to listen to every one of those, because so I really am interested in the Second World War, and now he's wanging on about art history during the Renaissance. So I sometimes think we might have a slightly looser listenership in some of the podcasts, where they go, right, every single week you're going to get hardcore, Tudor history or whatever, or football or whatever it might be. So yeah, that's my anecdotal impression.
But do you not think that maybe there are obviously the whole nature of the word specialism means that people would be specifically interested in one particular thing, whereas your general interest is history, and therefore your listeners must be people that are interested in stuff that's happened?
Well, you'd think so. You're right. You'd think so. That's my gut. Is I take away the particular religious belief and the clothes they're wearing and the music they listen to and the geography, and it's still human beings dealing with very familiar problems, right?
Yeah.
It's still humans trying to feed themselves, have sex with people, protect themselves from neighbors, deal with environmental challenges, absorb new technology. Like those things are something that everyone has done through history. It doesn't really matter if it's in 1960s America or 1066 here in Norway. I am interested in human beings and how they respond and how they behave, like this insane species that we are, and the weird things we do, the way we follow mad preachers and mad politicians, and why we keep doing that. So I think if you are interested in human behavior, then actually that should be pretty transferable, really, from the Second World War to the War of Austrian Succession, or the war of the warring states in 2,500 years ago in China.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're a proper historian and journalist by all traditional senses. But I get the impression with the pod, and forgive me, I'm not fully backdated in your nearly 20-year broadcast career catalogue, but you seem to handle it in a very I wish you were my history teacher at school kind of way.
Well, that's what I kind of say so, but probably because I'm really not a proper historian in many ways. I mean, I abandoned academic study, which I was intending to pursue, to go and work at the BBC to make history programmes. I was very lucky, huge privilege, just a great luck, absolute arbitrary luck, got plucked out and sent to do that. And so I've had a career of being I don't know. People get very upset every time I try and call myself something. I don't really. I'm very happy to have what anyone wants to call me, but I'm a sort of history broadcaster, I guess. And I've written what I would describe as particularly one prop history book, and that's one of the reasons I started podcasting, because that was so exhausting and brutal that I decided to do more TV and podcasting at the end of it. But but I thought because I'm trying to reach general audience, I think maybe I'm all right at talking about history to a general audience rather than to an academic student audience, because I haven't taught and that kind of thing. So, but that's very kind of you to say so.
When you talk about being plucked by the BBC, what was is that the beginning of your broadcast journey?
Yeah, definitely. So I was, I guess it was a slight prequel. I rode in the Oxford-Cambridge boat race while I was at Oxford. And
studying
it's very history,
of course,
and it's very boring, the Oxford boat race. So what they do is they make little videos with the students who kind of go, oh my god, I'm training so hard, I'm really tired, and I've got to go to lectures all day. And to which now, as a person with an actual job and children, I just want to say, God, pull yourself together. Anyway, and I did one of those, and I talked about, for whatever reason, the producer just came to Oxford and luck, just sort of chose me and said, let's go around. You're weighing on about history all the time. Let's go and talk about some history. And so I said, well, I love about studying history here and going rowing here. That used to be, that used to be, I don't know, building where they train the Indian civil servants to go and run the empire, that kind of stuff. And then a person in the BBC saw that, and they also knew that my dad was a journalist at that time working at the BBC, and they suggested a father-son programme. And I said yes. My dad said no, and I talked him into it.
What was he doing?
So he basically did a father-son program, which was military history, where I was young and he was old. So he would do the sort of general going, well, the general back here in the HQ deciding to do this, do that. And I would be on the front line going, well, meanwhile, for the guys on the front line, things are a bit different. They ran out of petrol and there was no drinking water or whatever. So we looked at the kind of way that battles have that effect. There's people in charge trying to do one thing, and then there's the reality on the front line doing another. And then that one thing led to another. So complete, absolute luck ended up launching into a career.
From the boat race, I mean, presumably you're at Oxbridge University. Which one? Sorry, Cambridge.
Oxford.
You were at Oxford, studying history. That's your path is fairly laid out in that regard. You're doing a boat race, and at that point, was media always on the horizon? Was it?
No, I did because what my dad did, and my mum was a TV journalist as well.
So really?
I wanted to be a rebel, go and do something completely different, really.
Well, that turned out well.
That did not turn out very well at all. What a muppet, But then the older I get, I realise that I was pretty bad at everything else. So talking and.
You rode in the boat race. You can't have been bad at everything.
Yeah, but I guess. But I wasn't going to make a career out of that, really.
Right.
And I think talking animatedly about and trying to make complicated subjects understandable was something that just ran through the core of my family, just my upbringing. It's what we all did all the time. Except, everyone did. So, I think it's it was a culture. It was a culture.
And funnily, because my immediate thought of hearing you. Or the product of 20 years of your work later for the first time, or not for the first time. I'm sure I've watched and seen you over the years, on terrestrial TV, right? It was all on BBC and that sort of stuff at the beginning. So I must have seen it.
Yeah, well, that's I mean, I think it was on. I was back in time, and I was hugely lucky, right? Because people, you could sort of. Back when I started, I think it was only. Most families in the UK had 5 channels when I started working TV, so there's a decent chance someone was going to see me at some stage doing a bit. So look, I've been incredibly lucky. I mean, most of the podcasts you have on here are, really hugely impressive. They've still fought an insurgency and they've managed to get their pod to a kind of critical mass. Whereas, I was so lucky. I entered the space with. Social media following, a bit of name recognition, and was lucky enough to get my pod up and running, really. And so I feel a lot of people, I feel very lucky at what the BBC was able to give me, that sort of old school linear broadcast tradition helped me out enormously as I entered the new world of digital broadcasting.
It's amazing you say that, because for me, one of the big observations that even my journey over the past year of the people I've spoken to was that podcasting was, funnily enough, like you and your parents, for the rebels, and it was different journalism and different media, and the big institutions will never win. And as I've been speaking to people over this year, I've seen that some of those big institutions have become so fluid in the development of the podcasting side of things. And BBC Sounds obviously is massively important in terms of delivering this sort of stuff to people. And it's just been nice to hear that people are still in control of their shows, even when they're working via the BBC or, you know, some of the Acasts and people like that have popped up as the big front runners in producing this stuff. It still seems like the hosts have primary control over what happens. What's your process? Who gets involved where, and what do you do?
Yeah, that's a really good insight. It's a really good point. It's still really loose over at History Hit. Like I have total control really. And we now, I mean, until very recently, we didn't really have. We had an audio producer who would cut it, but until recently, we didn't really have a sort of grown up any kind of oversight or any sort of producer who would give them a listen and say, oh, you know, you were really. That was too one-sided. You know, let's go back and do another episode where you talk about the Palestinian view of Israel-Palestine or a kind of pro-Brexit view. You know, so until very recently, we've had virtually no grown-ups involved in it at all. And I think, you know, obviously that's what people like about pods, isn't it? It's kind of real, it's unvarnished. We're getting to the point. We're trying to improve things, you know, so both in terms of the quality of content and the actual just quality of the audio quality and all that kind of stuff, and so there's getting a bit more structured. But no, there's still a kind of perception that it just needs to be on about sort of if I'm interested in the subject, let's hope the audience come along with it, you know, that kind of thing. It still seems the industry, the mode of work now, it might all tighten up and get really difficult and regulated, and companies coming with commissioning editors and all the things that I saw smothering creativity at the BBC TV when I was still there. That might happen to pods. I hope it doesn't.
I'm not convinced that there's space for that in the market, because the reality is that, and it's funny because I attribute this to a lot of what you were just saying. People are Dan Snow fans, right? Once they're listening to your pod, then you can cover a topic that they would never be interested in. And because they listen to your pod regularly, they will listen to that topic to hear you engaging about that topic, right? So as people become fans of you, that's where I think the podcast strength lies. Big pod people who have come out of traditional media during this time. You know, Ryan Jesperson, the first person I spoke to, was fired by Canadian broadcasting proper big entity. Started his live YouTube channel the next day. He's the biggest thing in Canada. Like, it happened like that. The Dan Le Batard show in the US, they were on ESPN for years. Finished with ESPN, went independent for, I think they were 3 months in total, and were bought by DraftKings for $50 million. Like, you know, I think the reason people are being given the fluidity to create what they want to create and how they want to create it without so much interference is because it can be done anywhere. Look where you're sitting now. You're not sitting at Television Centre, right? It's not required. You don't need the machine to produce History Hit, as you've demonstrated in the beginning, as you said. And therefore, I think that people are always going to be at the centre of the control because you're in charge. When you started this podcasting bit, had you podcasted? You presumably you'd been on BBC Reworks and things like that, where people had edited stuff together into podcasts. Had you ever actually?
I'd never podcast. I'd done a bit of radio. I'd done quite a lot of Radio 4, so I did a bit of that. But I definitely. I definitely think that I feel like it sounds like a terrible accent, but I feel like I got classical training at the BBC. You know, like when you have to do, I used to go do one-show films, which were really, everyone used to sort of turn their nose up at one-show films. But I thought they were brilliant because you'd go and cover a story. You interview veterans of World War II or people doing amazing things and historians. You didn't ask different questions if you're on BBC Four to the one show. I didn't go like, oh, I'm on BBC Four now, I'm going to ask clever. They just used less of it, right? In the edit, they just, but the day out would be exactly the same as if you were going to film. So I had to do, I probably did 200 of those films over 10 to 15 years. And it just meant that you had to get really, and I thought, when you work with those sort of people that have been through BBC like presenters that are on BBC Children or and at BBC Kids, and then they go up and do other stuff like the One Show, Country File. They're really good at the technical side of it. Like they're just good at talking to people and going and sounding interesting, right? Sounding interested in stuff. And so I guess I was very lucky in that I'd never podcasted, but I did feel like I knew how to ask questions. And also the key weird little take is, I get a lot of people coming up from the street and saying this, like, what is it's that, and it not necessarily praising it, but just commenting on other people's ways of doing it. It's like, it's that, how did you inject enough personality into an episode where it is about you and, you build a bit of a vibe and a bit of a feel, particularly for just a solo host, but while not swamping the contributor, right? Because you're here saying the contributor's amazing. We're going to talk about the Black Prince. We're going to talk about Adolf Hitler. And they don't want to hear like Dan Snow just yakking, like talking nonsense. But they do sort of, you do have to have a bit of a presence in that episode. And so I do think getting that right, getting that balance right is really challenging. And it helped that I'd worked with so many amazing broadcasters and done I'd done a lot of broadcasting by the time I came to it. I'm not saying I've got the right way or the wrong way, but I'm sort of well, and I do listen to other pods, and I always go, wow, okay, that's very different. Jeepers creepers, and maybe that works, for other. If it's Ricky Gervais, he's such an amazing character. You want to hear from him. I'm not Ricky Gervais. I'm not that interesting and funny. So I think I need to have a lot less of me in the episode.
Part of the job of podcast hosting, wherever you sit, is to take, especially if it's guest orientated or subject orientated specifically, is to take people on that journey, right? You're effectively their driver. And that's why if people can empathise with the types of questions you ask and things like that, they're presumably happy to let you take the reins. In terms of people that listen and how you interact with them, what's different in that respect between conventional broadcast and podcasting, if anything?
Well, it kind of slightly depends, doesn't it, on what is the broadcast vehicle. But the things I used to do, which is history, so less chat. I mean, obviously, God, if you're Jeremy Vine on BBC Radio 2, you're having these kind of loose chat, or Nihal on Radio 5, then you're having these kind of loose chats. I mean, I thought that daytime radio is basically very similar to podcasting, right? I mean, I think it's but for me, it was always a bit more polished. So there's a lot more production, a lot more, voiceover voice. It was like, then on the 3rd of March 1914 this happened, and then with some archive or some music, so I made very different. I'd never done a chatty long form, make mistakes, trip over yourself, swear a bit. Like I'd never done that kind of broadcasting, and I love that. I mean, that's what's great about podding, I think. How
long is a pod into a pod? So they normally roll at like 30 to 40 minutes, right? Your episodes? Finished?
Yeah, some down at 20, but 20 is the sort of minimum. And then, I like 30 to 40. I quite like that.
And how much recording goes into making a?
Oh mate, there's virtually no editing on mine.
Yeah, great. Yeah. That's what I was curious about, because obviously one of the nice bits is because it's open. This conversation here, there's no cuts and jolts or anything like that, and it means that by the time you get to the end of a conversation, you're seeing the reality of both people who are involved, whether you want them to or not. When you sit and speak to people about specific cases, what does your sort of what does this look like? What info have you got around you, and what triggers, and do you have any of it, or is it all in your head?
That's a good question. Yeah, that's a really good question. Traditionally, when we were doing them in the flesh, it'd be nothing. And I'd spend half the episode like desperately trying to think of clever things that I'd sort of forgotten about. But now that it's all gone remote, I've got the old Google machine at my fingertips, right? Which is interesting. So you can sound cleverer than you are, I think. And that has changed it. So I'm a bit scared now, maybe, of going back to in person, because when they say, obviously the Magna Carta was, it took place. There wasn't no one signed Magna Carta. They affixed their seals to Magna Carta. Anyway, so when that took place at Runnymede, and then I'd go, in my head I'm like, didn't the Lord Mayor of London, was he there? And now I can quickly check before saying, well, obviously Lord Mayor of London was there. So, and so I probably have come across as a tiny bit clever. But of course, what you lose is interaction. Certainly with the history, like you and I are having a good chat now, but certainly with the history where sometimes the historians are a bit older, maybe their tech isn't working brilliantly, and they will sort of just go blah, 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 blah. And you can't jump in as much and make little gags because you just lose the moment.
Yeah, sure.
And so I look forward to getting back to that with a bit more informality to it, and meeting in the flesh.
Where did they take place in the flesh?
All over the place, wherever we could afford at the time. But a mate of ours, a sound engineer that I know, got HS2, which is, if you're listening abroad, the high-speed railway. They're building up the spine of England at the moment.
Sort of.
Destroyed his house in North London, and he got compulsorily purchased, and he got given this like mad new build in the most unbelievably beautiful part of town, like this new, this weird little new development in amongst this Georgian architecture next to Regent's Park.
What?
I know. So we would get people to come there, and he built this little front room, and we'd do it there, and everyone, because it was so central, and it was like this kind of partially owned council flat that he'd been put into because the government destroyed his house to build a railway. It was great. So anyway, that's the answer you weren't expecting. So for about a year we were doing it there. It was quite a good little hack.
Yeah, no. And so when you go back, where are you going?
When we go back, I have no idea. I think we've reached the point now we all just go to a sound studio in central London. We're all grown stuff.
We're here in North London, right here in this studio.
Right.
So in terms of the history hit bubble, if you like, the website and social and all the bits that go with it, who looks after that stuff, or is that looked after?
That is the history hit bubble. We've got a big team now, because we have the podcast. We have launched several other podcasts. We have got a TV channel, a .tv, like Netflix for history. We do branded content work, so we do a lot. There's like 20 of us. It's pretty hardcore these days, and we all work out of an office in Shoreditch, and yeah, man, it's exciting.
In terms of the expansion of that brand, obviously when it first begins, there's you sitting there. What did the rollout look like? How did it grow? Obviously, there are lots of people that are going to listen to this who are running their podcasts now. They might be hitting those sort of critical numbers, and I think the journey between I feel like I ask this question of everyone, which is the journey between getting past starting podcasting to the point where you're going, this is a podcast, to taking that podcast into the next step of the sort of brand expansion of History Hit and so on. How long did that process take?
Well, I mean, it was a bloody process. There's corpses lining the path of advance and retreat. I mean, it probably took 3 years realistically. It wasn't just the pod. So because I'm a TV guy at heart, I had this parallel project of trying to launch this TV channel, Netflix History. It's called History at TV. And so that was brutal. I mean, that was a battle of the Somme, attritional warfare, everyone falling out with each other, sort of tears and recriminations in the pub, and going to the pub and getting it. So it was chaos. It was chaos. Losing hard drives, all the audio on it. I mean, you name it. So whatever people are experiencing at the moment, I have been there, and I see you, and I support you, and tell you that you will come through the other side of this. Like the First World War, there is green fields beyond those trenches, and so yeah, it was a brutal process, and for lots of it, I didn't know if we were going to survive, and whether I would see another week.
That close, got that close.
Yeah, definitely. I guess, yeah. But as you say, getting to that critical mass, getting that monetization is everything, and it feels good when it starts to come in. It feels so good. You can't really believe it. You can't believe someone's going to pay you money to just talk and have interesting conversations. And I'm sure lots of people listening to this will know what that feels like. And fingers crossed, all the stats look like the podcast market is going to attract more advertising, all that kind of stuff, more attention. So hopefully for lots of us listening to this, there will be a lifestyle that we can hack out.
I said to you at the very start that one of the things that Podicon do, or the PodBoard does specifically, that we believe is so important, is measures the conversation rather than just the download numbers. And it's interesting you talk about the monetization and the advertising. I have a sort of secret hypothesis that I'm quite happy to publicly discuss with anyone that will listen. That is that the advertising revenue that's currently being poured into podcasting is from conventional TV advertisers pouring in the way that they used to with TV and radio. And actually there's a new refined version of marketing that seems to also go on in podcasting. You see the brands, you know who they are. They're all the ones that are advertising on the little pods, picking out niche points of market. And that isn't clever ad buying. That's because they've come in as podcast advertisers rather than changing from conventional media. And I think people are starting to see the value in people that are engaging with channels rather than just numbers. There's too many fake numbers out there. There's too many legacy downloads, people that have had podcasts for 10 years that are getting 1 million downloads a week. And actually 400,000 of them are just because people have got their iPhones set to automatically download and don't realise they're carrying 150 episodes of a podcast they've not listened to for 3 years. So that interaction and those people engagement-wise is becoming ever more important with achieving the mythical monetization barrier. What was the first one for you where you were like, oh my God, this is happening? Someone's actually going to pay me proper money? Because I'm presuming there were bits where you were like, yeah, I'll take 25 quid to do this at the beginning.
Oh, you better believe there was.
Yeah.
But that's so. I mean, you're absolutely describing. I think that's completely correct. What is the? Okay, so what do I think was the? What was the moment? Yeah, there was just this moment. I think it was a heritage attraction or a tourist attraction. Could have been the Roman baths or something in Bath, but when someone just said, yeah, like I started the pod for the best reasons, actually, because I just wanted something. I wanted to take some control in my life. Like, I wanted to get out, and I couldn't stand just heading towards my late 30s and into my 40s, just being sent around by commissioning editors, and I just didn't feel I had any control. I felt like I was just very vulnerable to changing fashion, changing faces, changing everything. And I've been so lucky. I had a wonderful career. But I just needed something I could do that was mine. I just needed something to do. I could reach an audience and not be dependent on the BBC, on these big buildings, bigger people full of offices, and also I wanted something that I enjoyed. And I mean, I'm very lucky. I actually enjoyed the shtick that I do. Like I'm very, very happy visiting historical sites, talking to historians, even if no one was listening. Like, I'd be doing that. And that's why I started the pod, because it just gave me something to do. Like, I think it was actually sort of weirdly, when I look back at it now, it might have been therapy. I might have been going through a midlife crisis, and I just thought, I need to get out. I need to just get out and I want to go and visit a castle. But it's like the way men play golf rather than just go for a walk, because men for some reason need an excuse to go and wander around the countryside.
Yeah.
And I think I just felt a bit embarrassed at turning up to a castle on a Tuesday by myself. And so I just took my phone and the recorder along, went, I'm doing this podcast. And I felt like, oh, I've got a reason to be here.
Yeah.
And so that's how it all began. And the idea that eventually, like, people, like, yeah, someone came along and paid like some thousands of pounds to do a actual branded episode. I was just like, I don't believe it. I just don't, but can't believe it's happening.
Were you like, just hold on one sec? Was it
Yeah,
one
exactly.
of them?
Yeah, it was one of those. Let me talk to my team.
Yeah, just come back to you.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah.
And from there, again, people are always interested in that snowball effect. What was the? How long did you have to wait before it started? Or at that point, were you activated on the radar and people started approaching you?
Oh, no, it was definitely, like, I look at my friends now launching pods into the market and I go, bloody hell, that's quick, isn't it? They're getting to scale quicker than I did. I know I did like a year or two, 18 months, 2 years of proper just attritional warfare and just getting, I didn't look at the numbers to tell the truth in those early days.
That's always the secret though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do it because you want to do it and on the subject you want to do it on, and if your audience finds you, then you know you've got authentic audience.
Well, you summed up better than I can, but that's exactly right. And of course, look, I was hugely privileged. I was still working elsewhere. Like at the BBC, I was still getting old media jobs from the BBC. So it was just a nice addition. And then, just little bits of feedback would reach me. Like people would listen and enjoy. And I remember meeting the first person on the street who goes, I was expecting to say something about a TV thing. They went, I actually listened to your podcast. I thought, shit, that's so cool.
Yeah. Amazing. What's your rock up to a castle on a Tuesday? What do you carry with you then and now?
Well, I tell you, man, I'm very unfashionable. I travel as light as possible, and my audio guy is not happy about this. but I absolutely go Rode mic into iPhone.
Oh, proper.
And the reason I do is because when I did have my old school, when I did more for the BBC, and I would often turn up, and it would just be stuff. I had to have stuff in my pocket. Like I couldn't. Well, actually, look, I'll tell you the honest reason. It's because when I was doing stuff for the BBC, I would turn up, and if I suddenly unpacked a sound kit, they'd be like, "Mate, you're working for the BBC today," and I'm like, "Yeah, I'm just going to." We've interviewed the expert during lunch. I'm also going to interview her or him for my podcast, and obviously, I'm not going to scoop our show, and I'll leave it 6 months and put it out afterwards, right? I'm not going to go like I get it. And it was still obviously not the right thing to do, but it's what I did. And I just thought I'll just get the old iPhone out. No one will mind that. And I'm very disorganized. And I'm always on the road. I just want to be able to upload it immediately from my iPhone to Dropbox or whatever to give it to the editor. And it's like, no, just don't worry, Dan. And the amount of other devices, just get the Zoom recorder. All you got to do at the evening is take out a chip and put it into your laptop. I'm like,
too many steps. Leave me alone.
Like that is too many steps, I'm afraid. And you have to know yourself. You have to really know yourself. And you go, I'm off, especially in the old days when I was doing these big history jobs, I could be in the desert of Jordan or I was in Timbuktu in Mali. I'm like, if there's friction, we're going to lose audio because, my laptop's not going to work or whatever. If it's on the phone, as soon as you get signal, as soon as you get Wi-Fi, bang, upload, gone. And it worked for me. And I don't know whether we go back out now into the real world, now that the podcast has had a year and a half of really big growth and a bit more success. I don't know if we just suck it up and pay money for a sound engineer to come out now and just do stuff with me. But I still think you can keep it pretty loose.
Does that not destroy the authenticity of you and your process?
I think it might a bit.
Is the discreetness of you and your phone perhaps not part of what creates your on the road stories, because you haven't got someone else there that you're dragging around with you who's having an off day and therefore he's feeling a bit whatever, you know what I mean? Like, it's you and you're in control of that final output, and you've already built huge audience on that basis. It would almost be jarring to all of a sudden hear you in, Dolby stereoscopic 3D while you've got mics around you and everything like that.
Yeah, I think that's a very good shout. And also it is having another human being there is, if you're just little things, like if you're in a little castle, cell, you can get in like ships, historic ships are very tight spaces. Having another person does make it different where you can go. It just does. And so I think you might be right. You might be talking, my editor will be listening to this absolutely furious at you, but
I didn't mean it. I'm so sorry.
Keeping it primitive, yeah.
The expansion of History Hit and all of the other bits and pieces and TV and all of that sort of stuff. You still doing BBC stuff?
No, not really.
Finished?
I mean, I'm sort of full time on it now.
And
you hear YouTubers say this. It's not worth my while now to be actually like. It's a terrible. It's not meant to sound arrogant, but it's a reflection of where we are. There may be times where we do co-productions with Channel 5, so it'd be quite interesting to do some co-productions on the TV and audio side. But at the moment, I'd be much better off spending all my time making content for History Hit. That's just proving a lot more. The other nice thing about history is the evergreen nature to it. That's the other thing. So, if I go out today and make a audio pod about the War of the Roses, then we've got that. That's good on social. We can re-release it as a repeat pod. Our repeat pods do very well. I'm surprised to say they do. We release one repeat a week, and the audience don't seem to mind. In fact, we're often we release the sort of best in our back catalogue, and they often do better than the other pods that week. They do really well. So that's nice. And so at the moment it would be crazy for me to go and work for someone else, effectively. Give my to wander around being all enthusiastic and getting excited
for someone else,
being paid you few £100, and at the end of the day getting told to piss off and go home, and you have no lasting advantage, legacy from that day's work. So
but that's personal growth, right? You sound forever grateful for your training and your journey from the beginning to the BBC and so on. So I don't think there's any problem with growing up, is there? Everyone grows at some point and goes somewhere else.
That's right. I think you've got it right. Yeah. It's exciting. I'm in the middle part of my career now. I want a bit of ownership and a bit of control, and I'm interested in the business of it. When I was in my 20s, I couldn't believe it. Someone sent a taxi to my house, put me on an aeroplane, sent me to a country, put me in a hotel, and then I had sort of various adventures, and then I got sent home again at the end of it.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, this is a dream. Now I see those shows still on Netflix, still being repeated on the BBC, and I obviously get no money, no nothing. I don't even get told that. Like people in America, I just watch this show.
Yeah.
I go, oh, okay, good. I got paid £200 for that in 2004. But unbelievably lucky, huge. But now super excited about the next stage, which is building something for myself. Having that creative control. Getting in those lovely chats with people about how we're going to extend, build big. Whatever.
When's History Hit live?
History Hit Live tour. As soon as we've dealt probably with all the madness of COVID, we'll get back out there, I think. Yeah.
So you've toured it, right? It's done. The shows.
Yeah, 2 years ago. Yeah, it's 2 years ago. Yeah, it was good fun.
What?
But we didn't. We did actually. I didn't retour. I toured. We didn't do live podcast records, which we do this time around for sure. Yeah.
That sounds great. I think Steve and the Podicon boys have already spoken to you, haven't they, about Podicon Live in London?
Yes, they have.
Yeah. We'd certainly love to have you there. Obviously, during lockdown and so on, the show's grown a lot, right?
The show grew in lockdown. It did. I can't. I think we did a lot of episodes. I just think we did lots of episodes that maybe struck a chord on history of pandemics, what all this might mean, where we might be going, and maybe that helped. The world's got a bit more crazy. I think history in the 1990s, everyone thought history was kind of done and finished, and it suffered as a subject. And now that there's big historic things happening, climate emergency, wars, great power rivalry. The first land grab in Europe. Vladimir Putin grabbed the Crimea. Not long ago. I mean, that's first land sort of proper annexation in Europe for decades. That feels like a historic moment. So, I think, and pandemic. So I think we're back to thinking about history and needing it and wondering what the hell's going on. And so I think, it sort of benefits a bit from that.
When does it become history? For you, from a production point, when is it history?
I think we if we have if Peter Crouch was desperate to come on the podcast and talk about his England career, we'd say yes. But realistically, historians tend to say after about 20 years, you can get a sense of its import, what just how seismic an event was, whether it did actually matter. You kind of get people that maybe have retired and prepared to talk about it. You get some archives starting to open up, some books, some sort of. The first draft of history is obviously written by kind of journalists who bang out books straight away, and then you get kind of slightly more considered maybe 10, 15, 20 years afterwards. So I don't know, maybe something like that. It's 25 years a generation. It feels like that sort of thing. So 9/11, like 9/11 now, obviously lots of books have been written about 9/11, very good books, but I don't know, historians might start
looking. I think that's probably a good
the war
window.
on terror.
Yeah, interesting. Have you ever got it wrong? Have you ever put a pod out and looked back at it and been like, oh?
Yeah, definitely. I think making mistakes is one of the great joys of this medium, right? Which is that BBC One, you're just not allowed to get it wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're like, hello, at 9:00 on Friday night, on Saturday night, we're going to put this show out. And if it tanks, it's like, oh my God, it's just embarrassing. Everyone goes, let's defund the BBC, and you get fired. And people write newspaper articles about it, which is, it's madness, right? And so you're just allowed to go, look, I'm going to put 300 episodes out this year, and there's probably going to be one or two that are just rubbish. But the reason, no, that would be rubbish, but I'm going to do my best, and I'm going to make mistakes, and so I think the digital world's a bit more forgiving, I hope. Yeah,
for sure. Well, let's hope so. Believe me, I've done enough of my own. What do you listen to? Pods wise.
I am a American politics junkie. So I listen to all the big American podcasts, which keeps you busy, even after Trump.
Why the American? Why?
Well, I think that what happens in the world's I think what happens politically in the world's world's superpower matters enormously. Look, on one level, I probably do I find, and this is what Brits get very, but I do find it more. I find it more dramatic and interesting than British politics, but I also believe it matters more. So there is a kind of one level in which it just is
theatre.
Theatre, I think, actually.
Yeah.
But it does also matter more because if Joe Biden gets a deal on climate, it will transform the life of everyone on this planet. If Joe Biden, decisions he makes around his relationship with China, around tech just breaking up. I mean, again, everyone's like, oh, why are you interested in American politics? Like, if they break Facebook and Google up, that's a big deal.
We need to know about it.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, what are you on about? Whereas British politics is smaller, just really small. And I think and also I believe that what happens in America tends to end up on these shores. So I would listen to these American politics and get really into the weeds about, voter suppression. Oh, wow. And everyone would be like, oh, shut up. You're just sort of virtue signaling. You're trying to be you're trying to prove you're kind of, there's a group of people in this country who kind of try and prove their international credentials, their erudition by kind of following American politics more than British politics. And lots of people in Britain like, twats, basically. Yeah. And then you go, well, trust me, it'll matter. And then Boris Johnson's about to announce an ID card requirement, a photo ID requirement for voting in this country, which is a nakedly voter suppression technique imported from America. So, it does matter. When America sneezes, we catch a cold. So I love it. I think Americans are brilliant communicators. I love them as broadcasters. I think they're much better than we are.
Yeah.
So I kind of love listening to their idioms. I find that just really fascinating. I mean, if you just compare the state of the big American podcasts versus the sort of British daily politics podcasts, I mean, Jesus wept. The kind of just the use of language, the energy is just so different.
Well, they're passionate, right? They are so staunchly passionate, and perhaps that's
the sort of metaphors, the colloquial nature of them, the metaphors, the language. It's just brilliant. I love it. And then, so there's that. And then what else I listen to? And then obviously there's been just a giant explosion of history pods all around the world. So I'm listening to lots of those, lots of great history pods. The Gladwell pods, obviously, the British homegrown history pods are great. But unfortunately, I have the downside of this digital is true that you then disappear into. When I did listen to Radio 4 back in the day, or 5 Live or whatever, I did hear more like science and sport and popular culture. Like I don't get that much anymore because I've just got my head up, Louis XIV all bloody time. And so I miss that, and it's a shame. And I just probably need to add a few listening tips to kind of slightly correct that, just a bit of course correction.
One of your sponsors that you do reads for is a national lottery supporting English heritage.
Yeah.
Is that right? Have I got that right?
Yes. It's a national lottery thing. Yeah,
when you, I mean, that said in your voice with your CV is obviously infinitely more powerful than, Peter Crouch reading the same thing. Surely his would be, that almost sounds written for you. Is that how that works? Or do you get involved with that process? Because it sounds like you. Obviously, you're saying it.
Yes, in terms of the advert reads, that's another. No, they're really relaxed. I mean, some of them aren't. Some of the financial services ones obviously are really strict, and there's a bank. But on the whole, I completely write those myself. Yeah. I mean, I guess I don't. They come to us, so it's not like I go, do you know what, I think I'd be a very good messenger for National Lottery. But they come to us via our ad agency. I assume there's a campaign and lots of people are doing it. I don't really think too much about why they've come to me. But yeah, once they've come to me, most of them are pretty relaxed around. Again, it's just a weird little culture that's going up in podcasting. One reason people really like it. Because commercial radio, those ads are awful, aren't they?
Well, this is it. My question led to the fact that I find those ads not jarring at all. I don't feel like you're interrupting the show for even a little bit. It feels like a continuation. And you were talking about that advertising bit at the beginning. And the thing that most excites me about podcast advertising is that I don't really feel advertised to anymore. Part of that is because I feel like the people reading the ads are endorsing those products specifically, which presumably you can't get away from. You're not going to take an ad from someone that you wouldn't personally endorse, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, we turned down a few. Yeah, so that's good. Yeah, exactly. So I'm happy to endorse those things. And then particularly because they're not making me say embarrassing stuff, right? I mean, occasionally there's a tagline, which is woeful. They've worked out in some hellish, extremely expensive meeting, which I have to say. But then you can say that with a smile in your voice, and I think people don't mind. But on the whole, it's really nice that they don't make you read it out because it just sounds so much better.
Yeah,
like they're fools. It's been a really clever learning by the global ad market. Let podcast hosts read out in their own way.
They know their fans better than you do.
Yeah, and they can pull it off. Whereas if I'm reading out going, you've got to check out the new blah blah blah. It's so brilliant. Everyone just goes, this is just it's just embarrassing. Yeah.
We were talking about the swell of History Hit and the sort of raft of shows that have launched on the back of it. Seems like a good way to wrap things up by asking you about the other ones and what we should be looking out for and what's coming up.
Well, we got the brilliant Susanna Lipscomb doing Tudors. I mean, not just the Tudors, which is what the podcast's called, which we just realised that people love the bloody Tudors and they love it around the world. And so we decided to get one of the most brilliant broadcasters and historians in the country to do a podcast now. She's doing really well. That's going gangbusters. And then we took the opposite approach with the Ancients, which is ancient history, which is similar kind of niche. But on that one, we built it up with a guy called Tristan, who was in The Office, who just loved it. And we said, right, give the kid a pod. And so we've built him up from, I guess effectively a standing start as a kind of niche podcaster, and it's going well. They're getting proper downloads now, and that's the opposite when you don't bring new big talent like Susie in. You just start with it's a proper gritty podcast for proper people that love ancient history. And we almost want to say on that one, like, if you don't love ancient history, do not listen to this podcast.
Get out, because you're not going to like it.
And so that's been fun to see the two different approaches working there. And then we've got a medieval podcast, which we've just done with two very brilliant historians, and called Gone Medieval. And so, I mean, it's we've like it's been, launching these new ones has been quite interesting, and then they guest on mine, and to try and get the network effect going is quite exciting. And we've got a warfare podcast as well for military history with James Rogers. So yeah, the question is whether we try and go outside history now and do just cast the net more generally wider
with video. How much does that play a part in what you're doing currently, and is there some?
Yeah, well, because we've got this TV channel, we're not very good at getting we've got a whole TV department that make TV shows, and so we probably need to get better at. And sometimes my podcasts are built out of those TV shows, and we encourage people to go back and watch shows. We always try not to rip audio. I think the audience is too sophisticated. We try not, because I think you talk differently when you're on TV. You don't describe things as much. So we always try. If I'm doing I did a Viking Britain TV show with Kat Jarman, a fellow podcast host on History Hit Channel Network, and she and I filmed this TV show, but I made sure I kept stopping to do audio recordings with me and her talking as well, because that's for the podcast. So I think you need to. It does sound different. We do talk differently when it's audio only. So that's something we've been very mindful of. But we probably need to get better at using our video assets to kind of publicize podcasts and everything. But it's just, it's working out what drives new listeners. It's a tricky one.
There was a really clever thing that I spoke to. Have you heard of the Morbid podcast?
Yeah.
So I spoke to those girls, and one of the things they do is at point of release of a show, they release an Instagram post with 7 pictures of it, which are supporting documents to the pod.
Yeah, it's clever. Yeah.
So that when they're listening to it, there's some, and then if you reference that in the pod, it gets people driven to your socials at the time that they're listening to it. And you're obviously, I thought that was a cool sort of bridge between doing video and audio by providing.
That is a cool bridge. And when we're doing it well, we do that, but I often forget is the absolute honest truth, and not forget, but we just don't. Yeah, we just don't. We're not clever enough about doing that.
That is a consistent in podcasting. Is the podcast promise? You have the best intentions to do the best of things, and it never quite winds that way. Dan, I think we're good. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me. Love to have any of your others on again. If you want to pop them on to talk about their shows.
That'd be very cool. And thank you, and well done for everything you guys are doing. It's exciting. You know what they say in the gold rush, buddy? Don't look for gold, sell the shovels. That's what you guys are doing.
Or be the mine, one of the two.
Be the mine, yeah.
I think the nice part about all of that is that so many of these companies are getting, like you could, this whole thing would be so impossible to create for you 20 years ago. You'd be creating a TV station with many, many hundreds of employees to put out.
Isn't it amazing? Output. I know.
And now it's so much more accessible.
I know that everyone knows this, but yeah, I mean, only Rupert Murdoch could do what we've done 20 years ago. It's madness.
Yeah.
And I remember Apple Periscope released their app, their Twitter live stream app, basically, on the Apple iPhone. And in the space of that day, I was in Turkey working for BBC on the World Wine Anniversary. In the space of that day, global live streaming broadcasting went from requiring a satellite truck and a vast crew of people, which is what we had in Gallipoli, to me with my phone that day.
Yeah, crazy, isn't it?
And people around the world asking questions at the bottom of the screen, and you just answering them real time and showing them around the Gallipoli battlefield. And you're like, that was a day. That was a hell of a day. That's a hell of an update.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Delivered and done as well. No post.
Yeah. Done. Out in the pub. And you're like, wow, I just broadcast to tens of thousands of people around the world. That was pretty mad.